Hello and welcome to the CEC Gurukul live lecture series on Introduction to Indian Philosophy, and today I am going to talk about the narrative of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is simultaneously a philosophical and psychological text and an ethical tract of practical as well as theoretical ethics. The first and main narrative is the literal journey of Arjuna. Arjuna begins in state of confusion and anguish due to the moral conflict of killing his own cousins, relatives and teachers versus fighting for justice. Arjuna transforms with enlightenment by the end of the Bhagavad Gita and is clear of all doubts and confidently joins the battle, seeing it as his duty and responsibility. The second narrative is a journey of the history of Indian philosophy from the Vedas to Sankhya to Yoga. A third narrative is the discourse on what remains constant in the history of Indian philosophy and in Hinduism, the doctrines of moksha, karma and reincarnation, all centered around the immortality of the soul. And the link from philosophy to religion is the notion of God realization through Krishna consciousness, which is central to the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the Bhagavad Gita in its historical perspective. The Bhagavad Gita is in its written form in Sanskrit has been ascribed to 5th or 4th century BCE, but in the oral tradition it is much earlier. As the Bhagavad Gita is part of the story of Mahabharata, the earliest it can be dated is whenever Mahabharata was composed. The authorship of Mahabharata is usually attributed to Ved Vyas. So, we can say the same for the Bhagavad Gita. The story told in the Mahabharata is dated to be earlier than 13th century BCE. Hence, it is likely that versions of the Mahabharata in terms of oral stories could date as far back as 13th century BCE. Now, the Mahabharata is the longest epic ever related orally or written down as far as we know, and it is also considered the longest poem ever written. Amartya Sen states that it is about 7 times as long as the Iliad and the Odyssey put together. The Mahabharata consists of 1,01,253 verses, and the Iliad consists of 7,600 verses and the Odyssey consists of 6,000 verses. Now, the narrative of the Bhagavad Gita clearly indicates it is very much in the context of the epic, and this context cannot be ignored, even for the ethical theory found in the Bhagavad Gita. I thereby turn first to the narrative of the Mahabharata and then follow it up with a narrative of the sequence of the verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, let us start with the brief narrative of the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata, the great epic of India, is the story of the triumph of righteousness over evil. It is a story weaved around 2 families of the royal Kuru dynasty, Kauravas and Pandavas. Now, Kauravas were the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, who was blind by birth, and the elder brother of Pandu, the father of the 5 Pandavas. seed of the great battle was sown when Pandu, the younger brother, was made the king of Hastinapur, as Dhritarashtra was pronounced physically unfit to carry on the duties of the king. Now, this decision agitated Dhritarashtra's entire sense of being. He took it as an enormous disgrace. This unfulfilled desire led to his yearning for the throne even more. His eldest son, Duryodhana, though strong and courageous, was wicked and immoral. Pandu's sons, on the other hand, were extreme opposites of the Kauravas: wise, honest, kind, and moralistic. Since their childhood, they were ill-treated and looked down upon by the Kauravas. Pandu died when his children were very young, and therefore Dhritarashtra took over as the king. His heart was still not at peace because he was haunted by the thought that the throne was not his. He was only a caretaker, and that perhaps it will eventually go to Pandu's eldest son Yudhishthira, who in fact was elder to Duryodhana. Arjuna, the third son of Pandu, excelled all others in the field of archery, and was therefore able to win the hand of Draupadi, the most sought-after princess of Panchala, in marriage. This union frightened the Kauravas even more, as it made the Pandavas stronger than before. However, Dhritarashtra, to temporarily solve the enlarged problem, divided the kingdom in two parts, one each for the Kauravas and Pandavas. The Kauravas then plotted against the Pandavas and invited them to a game of dice. The rule was set that whoever would lose would go into 12 years of exile. And events took exactly the turn as planned. The Pandavas lost to treachery. Humiliation reached its culmination when Draupadi, the common wife of the Pandavas, was brought to the courtroom and was publicly mistreated. The Pandavas then took the vow to avenge this humiliation and left the kingdom to complete the period of their exile for 12 years. And when the Pandavas returned to Hastinapur to ask for their share in the kingdom, they were refused and were advised to stay where they had already taken shelter. There was no alternative left now but to start the preparations for the big battle. As this epic is about the victory of the right, that is dharma, over the wrong, which is adharma, Sri Krishna appears as the friend, philosopher and guide of the Pandavas to take the story to its finality. The scene for the big battle being set in the brief narrative of the Mahabharata, we can now proceed to the narrative of the Bhagavad Gita. We begin with the first or the literal narrative of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita begins with a dialogue between Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya. Now, Sanjay was the advisor and the chariot driver of Dhritarashtra. He was also a scholar of the scriptures and a practitioner of dharma. Hence, he was an ethical and impartial person. He was granted by sage Vedavyasa the ability to see distant events right in front of him, and this ability we call Divya Drishti. Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya to relate the battle scene to him. The background of Sanjay is important because even though he was on the side of the Kauravas as the narrator in the Bhagavad Gita, he presents an objective, impartial and complete account of the discourse between Krishna and Arjuna. Sanjay relates to Dhritarashtra that Duryodhana, while addressing Drona, who was the teacher of both the Kauravas and the Pandavas, looks across the battlefield at the mighty army of the Pandavas and admires them. The commander of the Pandava army is Dhrishtadyumna, the son of Drupad and the brother of Draupadi, and also a disciple of Drona. At this point, Krishna and Arjuna in a chariot are also seen by Duryodhana on the other side of the field. Duryodhana mentions them along with other kings and brave warriors on the side of the Pandavas, along with the sons of Pandavas and Bhima. Though the other Pandava brothers are not mentioned by Duryodhana, they are very much there. Yudhishthira, the king and the eldest, Nakula and Sahadeva. Duryodhana then announces the brave warriors on his side of the battlefield, including Bhishma and Karna and many others. Two mighty armies with brave warriors on both sides are ready for the battle. Bhishma, the senior most of the Kuru clan, now blows his conch fiercely, instilling confidence in Duryodhana and the army of the Kauravas. The other Kauravas join in with their conches, and the sound is terrific. Then Krishna and Arjuna blow their conches in response, following which Yudhishthira, Nakula and Sahadeva blow their conches, and then the other kings and brave warriors on the side of Pandavas all blow their conches repeatedly. And that tumultuous uproar resounding through heaven and earth rent the hearts of Dhritarashtra's sons. Then Arjuna picks up his bow as the initial clashing of the weapons begins. Now, instead of fighting the battle, Arjuna requests Sri Krishna, the charioteer, to park the chariot between the two warring sides, so that he can take a good look at the other side. And when Sri Krishna does so, Arjuna, seeing his cousins, uncles, other relatives, teachers and friends, expresses his misgivings. Arjuna says, "O Krishna, seeing my kinsmen present here, eager for battle, my limbs go weak, my mouth dries up, my body trembles, and my hair stands on end. The bow, Gandiva, slips from my hand, and my skin is burning. I can stand no longer, my mind seems to reel." Arjuna is well aware of the moral dilemma he is faced with at the moment. If we kill the sons of Dhritarashtra, what joy will be ours, O Krishna? Blame alone will accrue to us if we kill these murderous felons. The conflict is obvious, and the word felon at the time meant one who were guilty of 6 types of crimes: arson, poisoning, murder, violent robbery, grabbing land, and kidnapping married women. And killing such criminals was not considered a sin according to the Smritis. So, Arjuna was completely justified in killing the Kauravas in the battle. Yet, he felt that it was not proper to kill one's own cousins and family members, because this could lead to the loss of traditional values and eventually lead to chaos. So, Arjuna concludes, if the well-armed sons of Dhritarashtra were to slay me in battle, unresisting and unarmed, that would be better for me. Arjuna then threw down his bow and arrow and sank down in the seat of the chariot with overwhelming grief in his heart. Thus ends chapter 1 with a difficult task for Sri Krishna ahead to convince Arjuna to join the battle. Now Sri Krishna, who till now was patiently hearing these words of Arjuna, undertakes to clear the doubts of Arjuna, and a great dialogue between the two ensues. This dialogue goes on in 18 chapters. It is the 18th chapter that Arjuna ultimately realizes his duty and picks up his bow and gets ready to fight. Now, chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, as we have seen, deals with the doubts and distress of Arjuna. Chapter 2 onwards till the 18th chapter, Sri Krishna in various ways convinces Arjuna to fight and give away his fears, which only exhibit a trait of unmanliness. In chapter 2, Sri Krishna explains to Arjuna the distinction between body and soul, the wisdom of the Sankhya philosophy, which says soul is unborn, cannot be injured, and does not perish. Body alone is destructible. One should not therefore grieve for something that is bound to perish. Again, since soul is eternal, one should not grieve for that either. And therefore, he should arise from his misplaced grief and understand the distinction between real and unreal. The unreal can never become real, and the real can never die or decay. And Sri Krishna says, Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakah, na chainam kledyanti apo, na shoshyati maruta, which means weapons do not cut the soul, fire does not burn it, waters do not wet it, and wind does not dry it. He should therefore cast away these doubts and perform his duties, which is his swadharma as a Kshatriya. If he, while performing his duty, is slain, he will go to heaven, and if he turns out victorious, he will enjoy the riches on earth. Sri Krishna also teaches Arjuna Karma Yoga at this point and says, Karmanya vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala heturbhu ma te sango stava karmani. One has control only over the action which one is supposed to perform, not on the consequences of the action. One should therefore focus only on the action and not focus on the fruits of the consequences of the action. At the same time, one should not be attached to inaction. Now, it is important to realize here that Sri Krishna is not saying that the consequences of one's actions are not important and that they should not be taken into consideration. But what he is clearly saying is that an action should not be performed for the sake of the fruits of the consequences. Do not allow rewards to be the motive of your action. The Bhagavad Gita is a very complete, concise, and precise text. Each verse is like a mathematical theorem. One should be very careful to read it literally. Even translations sometimes build in interpretations. Misinterpretations often result into arbitrary conclusions reached by those who claim to be Hindu. This is a prime example. Shri Krishna does not say that the consequences of an action are insignificant. In fact, the consequences of Arjuna joining the righteous battle may very well be victory, which is extremely important, as defeat would mean the rule of the cruel Kauravas and an unjust society for decades. But in fighting the battle, Arjuna should not be motivated by the reward of this happy consequence of victory, but by the rightness of the action itself. Even more simply put, to say that one should not be motivated by the reward of the action does not mean that one should not be motivated by the consequence of the action. And I hope this is clear. The next verse is equally important, as it too signifies detachment from the fruits of action. And it says, Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjay siddhi asiddhi yo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. Abandon attachments to kingdom, relatives, etc. and establish yourself in yoga. That is, perform your action or your duty with equanimity with regard to success and failures. Now, equanimity means having an even mind in view of both success and failure, pain and pleasure, and that is yoga. Shri Krishna says that a yogi is one who renounces attachment to action and treats success and failure in the same manner by maintaining equanimity of mind. This attitude will discard all the notions of I or mine, and he will become steadfast in spirit, that is, remain unperturbed in all conditions, and thus will attain the state of God-realized soul. Now, in chapter 3, Arjuna is still not convinced and asks Krishna, if knowledge is superior to action, then why does Krishna urge Arjuna to perform such a calamitous action? On this, Sri Krishna extols the yoga of action and says that it is impossible to live without performing actions, and at the same time, it is only through performing actions that a man attains perfection. Even a Jnana Yogi must perform action in order to maintain his body. But the important thing is to always perform duties without attachment. Your duties are like performing sacrifices. A person who does not perform this sacrifice lives a life of self-gratification, of just fulfilling his desires. Shri Krishna, bringing in the Sankhya notion of Prakriti, explains that the wise man has a deep insight into the nature of the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, and is therefore aware of their influence and does not get deluded by their effects. He remains at the level of Sattva and does not disturb the wheel of creation, where everyone has a role or duty to perform. No one can be dispensed with. If anyone ceases to cooperate, it is the wise who takes along others deluded by Rajas and Tamas in a spirit of duty and selfless service to keep the wheel of creation rolling. These wise men, dedicating all actions to him, get in turn freed from the bondage of all actions. As long as one is in the clutches of desire, one will remain attached to actions. Therefore, the bigger enemy is desire. In chapter 4, Sri Krishna explains to Arjuna that these teachings have been imparted by him to sages in the past, at the beginning of the creation also. And he says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. Whenever righteousness is on the decline, he takes birth for its protection. Those who take refuge in me and are completely rid of passions, fears and anger become one with me. Sri Krishna says, whoever approaches him, he approaches them, for his path is open to all. He divided society into 4 orders: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras, in accordance with the predominance of a particular guna, the sattva, rajas or tamas. And the duties corresponding to these gunas were apportioned to them. One must know the difference between action and inaction at this stage. A true yogi sees inaction in action and action in inaction. Though fully involved in actions, he is freed from the desires for action. He performs actions remaining oblivious to the fruits as well as the thoughts of the world. He transcends all pairs of opposites. His actions are for the sake of sacrifice, for loka sangrah or the general welfare of people, and does not incur any blame for his actions. Now, another important verse from the Bhagavad Gita which is from chapter 4, and it is Brahmarpanam Brahma Havir Brahmagnau Brahmana Hutam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina, which means Brahman is the instrument, Brahman is the oblation. By Brahman is the oblation offered into the fire of Brahman. Brahman alone is to be reached by one who meditates on Brahman in one's works. However, the soul that lacks discrimination and is ever in doubt will never attain this world or the world beyond, and will never find happiness. Sri Krishna therefore exhorts Arjuna to become a karma yogi and rise up to fight. In chapter 5, Arjuna asks which of the 2 yogas is superior, Jnana Yoga or Karma Yoga. In answer to this question, Sri Krishna says that although the 2 lead to the same destination, the path of action is superior because it is easier. Without Karma Yoga, Sankhya Yoga or Jnana Yoga cannot be accomplished. A Karma Yogi offers the fruit of his actions to God and thereby attains God realization. He is untouched by worldly things. To him, all are equal, whether it is a Brahmin, a cow, a dog, or an outcast. He never partakes in sensual pleasures, for he knows that they are temporary and therefore a source of suffering. Sri Krishna says at the end of the chapter, he says, Bhoktaram Yagya Tapasam Sarva Loka Maheshwaram Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam Gyatva Mam Shantim Richati. That is, the one who knows him as the enjoyer of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme Lord of the worlds, the friend of all beings, attains peace. In chapter 6, Sri Krishna glorifies the characteristics of the renunciator or yogi and calls him the God-realized soul. And he says, Jnana Vigyan Triptatma Kutasto Jitendriya Yukta iti Uchyate Yogi Sama Loshtashma Kanchana. Meaning, the yogi who is content with the knowledge of the self and also of knowledge of the difference between the self and the physical body, who is established in the self, whose senses are subdued, and to whom earth, stone, and gold seem all alike, is said to be well adjusted. Arjuna, after hearing the characteristics of a true yogi, is still in doubt because he thinks that mind, which is unsteady and powerful, is very difficult to control, and therefore the state of a yogi is impossible to achieve. Sri Krishna, however, explains to him that with practice, mind can be checked and suppressed. Arjuna was still confused about the fate of those who are firm in their faith, but somehow get swayed by their passions. Sri Krishna says that people carry their karmas to their next life. A believer is suitably rewarded by getting birth in a family where he does not have to restart, but only resume his duties of the previous life. And he further gets the chance of enhancing his spiritual state. In chapter 7, Sri Krishna explains to Arjuna the nature of the Supreme Being, by knowing which nothing else would remain to be known. And Sri Krishna unfolds his real nature to Arjuna. He tells him that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, and ego constitute his lower self. The higher self is the Jivatma, through which the lower self, comprising the inanimate world, sustains. And he says, Etad yonini bhutani sarva nitya upadharaya aham kritsnasya jagatah prabhavah pralayasthata. That is, know that all beings originate from these two. Therefore, I am the origin and the dissolution of the whole universe. The men, deluded by the three gunas of Prakriti, fail to recognize me. In chapter 8, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna about his own supreme abode, after attaining which one does not come back into this world of births and deaths. And that supreme abode can be attained only by focusing on one's duties and by ceaselessly contemplating on him. So, Sri Krishna prescribes to Arjuna to be steadfast in his Karma Yoga so that there is no return to this mortal world. In chapter 9, Sri Krishna unfolds the mystery of the Nirguna Brahman, that is, his divine nature, and asks Arjuna to surrender himself to him, for he will absolve him from the consequences of fighting the battle and killing the people on the side of adharma. Sri Krishna says, Shubha Shubha Phalair Evam Mokshasya Karma Bandhanai Sannyasa Yoga Yuktatma Vimukto Mam Upaishyasi. Thus imbued with a mind steadfast in the yoga of renunciation, you will free yourself from the bonds of karma, productive of auspicious as well as inauspicious results. Thus liberated, you will come to me. In chapter 10, Sri Krishna continues to describe to Arjuna, and he says, Yo mam ajam anadim cha veti loka maheshwaram asamudha sa mrityeshu sarva papai pramuchyate. One who knows me as unborn and without a beginning, the great Lord of the worlds, is undeluded among mortals and is liberated from all negative acts. Now, then Sri Krishna explains to Arjuna his universal form, and it will be best if you read those verses from chapter 10 on your own. In chapter 11, Arjuna requests Sri Krishna to make him see his divine universal form. Sri Krishna then grants Arjuna divine eyes to enable him to experience the supreme divine form of Sri Krishna. After witnessing this splendid sight, Arjuna feels both joyful and terrified. Sri Krishna then tells Arjuna that those on the side of evil, as it is, will be slain by him. But as Arjuna is a true fighter, he should arise and become an instrument in conquering them and enjoy the glories of success, and by doing this duty, he will not accrue any sin. In chapter 12, Arjuna asks Sri Krishna who are the best type of worshippers. Sri Krishna explains to Arjuna that the characteristics of the devotees who are dear to him, and he says that those worshippers are most dear to him who have supreme faith in him and are ever united with him through meditation. Those worshippers are speedily delivered from this cycle of birth and death. In chapter 13, Sri Krishna explains the truth of Kshetra, the field, which is the body, and Kshetragya, or the knower of the field, which is the soul. Everything in the world, animate or inanimate, is the result of the union of these two. The 5 elements, that is earth, water, fire, air and ether, then the ego, the intellect and the unmanifest prakriti, the 5 sense organs and the 5 motor organs, the mind and the 5 objects of the senses are all the evolutes of Kshetra. And along with these, desire, aversion, pleasure and pain are its modifications, which arise when the self comes in contact with the Kshetra, which is the body. Now Sri Krishna enumerates certain virtues which must be cultivated in order to secure the knowledge of the self. Cultivation of these virtues are necessary, for otherwise a person may get deluded by the evolutes of the Kshetra. And which is why Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that knowing the two, that is Kshetra and Kshetragya, while performing one's duty, one reaches the Supreme Spirit and is not born again. In chapter 14, Sri Krishna imparts to Arjuna the supreme wisdom, the possessor of which attains liberation. It is basically the Sankhya teachings of the 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. One who knows that the doings are just the turbulences of the 3 gunas and remains as a witness of these, keeping his faith and identity with the Supreme, becomes qualified for attaining Brahman. In chapter 15, Sri Krishna illustrates how one can reach the supreme state of immortality, and how he is present in all and is the source of all that there is. One who grasps this knowledge becomes wise, and the purpose of his life gets accomplished. In chapter 16, Sri Krishna enumerates the characteristics of those who are godlike and the ones who are demonic. He tells Arjuna that those with demonic nature are born again and again in the demonic wombs and keep sinking further down in the horrifying hell. These are habitually in the grip of the three foes of mankind: anger, desire, and greed. Sri Krishna lauds the scriptures as they guide men in determining what is right and what is wrong. Men must therefore follow the scriptures. In chapter 17, Sri Krishna continues with the characteristic traits of men with divine and demonic dispositions, bringing in the preponderance of the three gunas as the determinant of such personalities. Chapter 18 is the most potent chapter to dig out the philosophy of action in the Bhagavad Gita. Answering Arjuna's query about the truth of sannyas, that is renunciation, and tyag, which means relinquishment, Sri Krishna distinguishes three types of tyaga: sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. It is only the sattvic type of relinquishment that is about doing one's prescribed duty simply for the sake of duty, without any streak of attachment to the fruits, is commendable. Then he goes to distinguish among the three kinds of knowledge, action, and the agent, the three kinds of intellect and steadiness or fairness, and the three kinds of joy. No one can escape the three gunas. Sri Krishna also tells Arjuna the duties of the different castes which are assigned, keeping in view the inborn qualities of the person. One should not abandon one's natural duties. Brahman can be realized either by the path of knowledge, which further leads to the path of action or actionlessness, or by the path of action or actionlessness. Also, if out of egotism a person begins to think that he is the doer or he will not do, then he is utterly mistaken. Nature propels you towards your duty. God is seated in all beings. Sri Krishna advises Arjuna to take refuge in him by performing his assigned duty, and he will absolve him of all sins. In the end, Sri Krishna asks Arjuna whether or not his confusions have been cleared. Arjuna says that all his doubts have been shed and he has gained wisdom. He will fight. Nashto moha smritir labdha tvat prasadan mayachyuta sthito asmi gata sandeha karishye vachanam tava. That is, destroyed is my delusion, and I have, by your grace, O Krishna, gained insight. Freed of doubts, I stand steadfast. I will act according to your word. And indeed, he joins the battle. There seems to be some inconsistency in the last portion of chapter 18. If divinity is in all of us, why don't we just realize it, and then we are bound to perform the right action without going through knowledge and understanding in the detailed manner that Arjuna has had to do in this dialogue? This can be resolved simply. Yes, indeed, once we authentically realize the divinity in us and surrender ourselves to us. We do not need anything else to perform the right and dutiful action. But easier said than done. Due to being occupied with day-to-day life and our individual varnas, we do not get the time to reach this stage which only a few reach. This is why the path through the discourse like that for Arjuna is there for most of us, indeed for all of us, regardless of caste, who have not reached the stage of God realization. Nonetheless, God realization is also the ultimate aim.